You reread an old message twice before deleting it, like touching a bruise to see if it still hurts. It does. The pull isn't loud, but it's there, a steady hum beneath everything else. You tell yourself it's habit, not attachment. You call it comfort because it once was. That's how the loop begins. At first it was safety, the way they knew what to say, how to make silence feel less like absence. You learn to read their moods the way some people read weather, alert for sudden change. It made you feel prepared, needed, maybe even strong. That was the trick. Over time, care blurred with control. You stopped checking what you wanted before checking what they wanted. Your body learned to brace before they even spoke. What used to ground you started to press down instead. An emotional trauma bond works like that. It rewires safety to mean familiarity, even when that familiarity hurts. The brain tags it as home, not danger. That's the hardest part, realizing the comfort isn't current, it's an echo. You keep returning to it not because it's right, but because it's known. The pattern holds its weight until you see it for what it is, not shelter, but repetition. And once you see that, something loosens. The air shifts. You can finally name the pull without answering it. You've felt how familiarity can disguise itself as love. The same tone, the same apology, the same promise. It steadies you for a moment, then drains you again. This is the quiet gravity of familiar pain. It keeps you orbiting what you already know. People often stay because leaving feels like betrayal. You tell yourself history matters, that love means endurance. You repeat their reasons in your own voice until they sound like truth. They're trying, you say. I just need to be patient. What you mean is, I don't want to start over. The cycle depends on that hope. Every small kindness recharges it. You cling to the memory of who they were on their better days, using it as proof that what's happening now isn't the whole story. That's how loyalty gets tangled with loss. You protect the version of them that only shows up after the hurt. Over time, your world starts to shrink around their moods. You soften words before speaking, plan your quiet around their storms. Your needs turn into calculations, how much calm you can buy with one more compromise. Each time you trade a piece of yourself for peace, it feels temporary. It never is. The illusion says that staying shows strength. In truth, it drains the very self that love is supposed to protect. It tells you that your endurance will earn safety, when endurance is what keeps the harm alive. That's the turn that's hardest to see. Pain wrapped in meaning still looks like devotion. You can name every reason to stay, and still feel the ache of disappearing. You already know the feeling of that disappearance, the quiet fade of your own edges. What comes next is learning that loyalty doesn't have to mean loss. Notice how the cycle always has a rhythm: tension, collapse, relief. You tell yourself it's progress because the relief feels real. The argument ends, the apology comes, and your body unclenches just enough to believe it's over. That's the hook. The calm after pain feels like proof that the bond matters. This is where the pattern builds itself. Every high after a low becomes emotional evidence that the connection is strong. When they reach for you after the damage, it feels like rescue. Your brain marks that contrast, fear, then comfort, as love. It learns to crave the moment the storm breaks, not the quiet before it starts. Intermittent reinforcement works this way. Unpredictable kindness after hurt keeps the attachment alive. You start measuring love by its return, not its consistency. They say, "I didn't mean it." You believe them, because the apology comes with tenderness that feels truer than the harm did. Relief becomes the signal that everything is okay again. Over time, your body starts answering before your mind can question. A text, a tone, a sigh, it all pulls you back. The echo of their attention fills the same space the pain created. You chase it, not because you forget what happened, but because the temporary comfort feels safer than emptiness. You might tell yourself you're choosing forgiveness, but really, you're seeking equilibrium. The bond keeps you circling the same small range between danger and calm. That repetition teaches you to mistake intensity for depth, volatility for passion. The cruel part is how convincing it feels. Relief floods the system, and for a moment, the world steadies. You think, this must mean it's love, but the same hands that soothe you are the ones that made you flinch. Here's what happens when the echo answers back. It reminds you what being wanted felt like before it started to hurt. That memory is what keeps the door unlocked, even when you know better. And underneath that recognition is something simpler, the body remembering safety, even when the story no longer matches it. You already know the feeling of what comes after, the stillness that doesn't feel like peace yet. The calls stop, the tension lifts, the world goes quieter than you expected, and instead of relief, there's an ache you can't name. You keep checking for a message that doesn't come, even though you swore you wouldn't. This is the withdrawal part of the bond. Without the push and pull, your system doesn't know what to do. You miss the rush of meaning that came with every high and low. It's strange how loss can sound like silence instead of absence. You catch yourself replaying the same moments, not because you want them back, but because you're trying to understand who you were inside them. The calm is confusing at first. There's no signal to react to, no script to follow. You move through the day like you've forgotten your lines. Food tastes dull. Music feels heavy. Time stretches. You think something's wrong with you, but it's just your body rebalancing, learning what steady feels like without a reason to brace. In grief, even relief feels wrong. You might cry, not for the person, but for the part of yourself that kept hoping. The quiet exposes how much energy went into managing someone else's storms. Now that it's over, you're left with space that doesn't know what to hold. It helps to remember that absence isn't emptiness, it's room, space returning to you after being borrowed for too long. Still, that knowledge doesn't soften the first nights alone, when every thought wants to reach back toward the noise. Here's what happens when the pull fades. You meet yourself in the silence, not the version shaped by tension, but the one who's been waiting underneath it. That meeting is slow, almost tender. You start to realize the stillness isn't punishment. It's recovery practicing its first steps. At first it seems like healing means cutting the cord, but what actually changes is how you read your own signals. The body learns patterns faster than the mind can unlearn them. Every spike of adrenaline, every soft moment after chaos, it all writes itself into muscle memory. That's how volatility starts to masquerade as intimacy. When love first mixes with fear, the nervous system treats the contrast as connection. The sharp drop after a fight, the sudden warmth that follows. It feels like closeness because it requires such full attention. The body confuses vigilance with presence. The brain releases the same chemicals it does for affection, even though the source is threat, not care. You start to crave the reset that comes after rupture. The apology feels powerful because it promises safety. Your pulse steadies, your chest loosens, and for a moment it seems the storm has meaning. That relief, chemical, emotional, physical, becomes the proof that the bond still matters. You're not chasing chaos, you're chasing regulation through someone else. Over time, the repetition itself becomes comforting. You know when the tone shifts, when the next break is coming, how to preempt the worst of it. That predictability feels like control. It's not. It's adaptation, the body's way of surviving by turning the unpredictable into routine. That's why it feels wrong when peace finally arrives. A calm connection doesn't light up the same pathways. The nervous system mistakes steady for dull because it hasn't yet learned that safety can be quiet. It reaches back toward what it recognizes, even if what it recognizes is pain. Notice what happens when you name that pattern. Your body starts to separate history from present tense. The old charge dulls a little, and someone else's storm stops feeling like your weather to track. That's the moment when understanding turns into release. You can see how the bond was built, not as proof of love, but as the nervous system trying to make sense of inconsistency. You see that the intensity was never depth. It was survival written in the language of care. From there, everything starts to slow. The same signals that once pulled you in begin to lose their urgency. The silence that once felt empty starts to sound different. It's not absence anymore. It's space returning to its real purpose, room enough to rest, without waiting for the next impact. Here's what happens when you start to wake up. The world tilts. What once felt like love now looks like exhaustion you kept calling loyalty. You see the pattern clearly, and for a moment, clarity feels like loss. The illusion breaks, but the comfort it gave doesn't vanish with it. Leaving the bond doesn't only mean walking away from a person, it means stepping out of a version of yourself. The one who waited, negotiated, explained. You start missing the familiarity of that role, even while knowing it cost you pieces of peace. That's the strange grief of waking up, mourning what hurt you because it shaped who you were. Guilt shows up next. You think of their better days, the laughter between storms, the promises half kept. You question your memory. Was it really that bad? That doubt is part of the detox. The nervous system searches for the old rhythm, not because it was good, but because it was known. The loneliness that follows can feel sharp. Without the old pattern, your life goes quiet. Friends don't always understand the pull that still lingers. You try to explain how emptiness can ache worse than harm. You're learning to live without the constant signal that once told you who you were. That's the real cost of waking up, losing the version of safety that was never real, but always familiar. It's identity without the tether, agency without the map. You walk through ordinary moments and feel both free and unmoored. Still, the loss is evidence that change is real. Pain doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you stopped mistaking survival for connection. And as the noise fades, a quieter truth begins to form. Freedom doesn't rush in all at once. It arrives like morning light, slow, uneven, and enough to see by. You already know the feeling of calm that used to make you restless. The quiet stretches, and a part of you still expects the next jolt. That's where recovery begins, not in the absence of chaos, but in learning how to stay when nothing demands your defense. At first, steadiness feels foreign. You wait for the signal that something's wrong. You test the new calm, leaning into it the way someone checks the weight of a bridge. You notice how your body still prepares for loss, even when safety is real. That's not failure, that's memory working its way out. Relearning steady ground means building trust in smaller increments. You listen to what your body says without letting fear translate it. Hunger, tiredness and quiet, these become data, not danger. You start responding instead of reacting. That's how safety relearns its shape. Closeness changes too. It stops being a rescue mission and starts being mutual presence. You begin to see that connection doesn't require constant repair. Someone showing up without urgency used to feel dull. Now it feels honest. You don't have to brace for the apology before the care. Some days the calm will still itch. You might reach for old patterns just to feel something predictable. But each time you choose to stay with the steadiness, you teach your body a new story. That warmth can last without breaking. That attention doesn't have to hurt to feel real. That's what agency looks like here, not control, but choice. You can pause before responding. You can notice a pull and still stay still. Eventually, the calm stops feeling like waiting. It starts feeling like ownership of your time, your quiet, your pulse. What once felt empty becomes room enough for connection that doesn't demand rescue, only presence. Notice how the same stillness that once felt unbearable now holds something lighter. You can feel sadness and not mistake it for danger. You can remember without reaching back. That's what freedom starts to look like, not numbness, but movement that belongs to you. At first, you think release will feel like triumph. It doesn't. It feels like balance returning, like carrying only what's yours again. You stop rehearsing what you'd say if they called. You stop checking for the echo. The space that used to ache begins to settle into ordinary quiet. What changed isn't the past, it's your position inside it. The chain was never just their hold. It was the body's belief that leaving meant losing safety. Once that belief dissolves, the weight shifts. Now, when warmth comes, you can let it stay without fearing the turn. You can choose closeness and still keep yourself. The difference is choice, the presence of options where there used to be reaction. That's what lifts, not the memory, not the feeling, but the rule that said you had to follow it. What remains is steadier. It's not absence. It's space made wide enough for feeling and freedom to share the same breath. You've seen how the pattern loosens, first in thought, then in the body. The calm that once felt uncertain becomes something you can stand inside. Freedom isn't a single act of leaving. It's a practice of staying with what's steady. Each time you choose pause over panic, each time you answer gently instead of defending, you're building proof that safety can last. Recovery doesn't erase the pull. It just gives you room to notice it and still choose differently. The courage isn't in never slipping back. It's in returning to balance sooner each time. Some days that will mean deep breaths before you speak. Other days, it's stepping outside, letting the air remind you that your life exists beyond the loop. Small things hold the weight of change. You've already begun. The fact that you can see the pattern means you're no longer inside it. You did something brave by listening this far. Keep going. Share what steadiness feels like when you find it, so someone else can too. Thanks for watching.